Aloha mai kako, you are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
Since 1996, the United States Department of Defense has accumulated an $8.5 trillion black hole in its budget. The number is so staggering that it is quite literally inconceivable. Several times larger than the annual budget of the entire federal government, it is equivalent to half of the entire fraudulent debt of the United States government itself. Aside from a recent report by Reuters or the occasional back-of-the-paper mention in one of the dinosaur media outlets, however, you'd have to turn to Russian state-sponsored media to discover this fact.
Since 1996, the Pentagon has spent $8.5 trillion in taxpayer money that has never been accounted for. And nobody can say for sure how many billions of that amount were wasted on goods and services that were never delivered, on overpayments to contractors and many other things. What does Congress do about it? Nothing. And national security expert Steve Miles is here with me to help us crunch these numbers. $8.5 trillion unaccounted for?
It's a lot of money. This is the kind of thing that you would think would bring Capitol Hill to a screeching halt. There'd be hearings kind of almost daily. You'd have various committees looking into it. None of that.
An alien visiting from another planet could be forgiven for legitimately questioning why this scandal is virtually unknown, while the details of Justin Bieber's latest arrest or Miley Cyrus's latest antics are literally unavoidable in the cultural zeitgeist, or why the use of steroids in Major League Baseball is considered worthy of earnest congressional investigation, while this unaccounted-for $8.5 trillion is relegated to passing mention in the occasional congressional hearing.
Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them?
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
What seems perplexing from an outside perspective, however, is mundane reality to those inside the system. The truth is that despite all the fuzzy rhetoric about republics and inalienable rights and the rule of law, the United States is nothing but an oligarchy, run by a handful of international banking syndicates, their multinational corporate cronies, and the politicians in their back pocket. The Pentagon budget story is not reported on for the simple reason that it is the defense contractors that own much of the media and have intimate relations with those outlets that are not directly under their control.
In April of 2008, David Barstow of the New York Times broke a story about how the Pentagon used 75 military analysts, former military men, to get the Bush administration's version of the war in Iraq out to the American people.
We've got generals, and if you ask them about the prospects for war with Iraq, they think it is almost certain.
And the defense contractors, in turn, own the political figures that decide who receive the government's defense contracts. The classic example of this is Dick Cheney. As George H.W. Bush's Secretary of Defense, he awarded a contract to KBR, a Halliburton subsidiary, to investigate the possibility of contracting out military services to private companies. Unsurprisingly, KBR concluded this would be a good thing, and soon Halliburton and other private companies were receiving a larger and larger slice of the Washington defense budget pie. Also unsurprisingly, Cheney left his post as defense secretary at the end of the Bush administration and became CEO of Halliburton. But this is not the only example of the defense contractor revolving door. As Ryan Dawson of the ANC report notes in his new book, The Separation of Business and State, Thomas White, the Secretary of the Army, was involved with Enron as a senior executive. He unloaded 200,000 shares, $12 million worth, of their stock during that scandal. While White was serving as vice chairman of Enron Energy Services, he actively used his political contacts to give Enron a single bidder contract to privatize the power supply for Fort Hamilton. He was also fond of using military jets for personal trips for himself and his wife. And Gordon England, the Secretary of the Navy, flipped back and forth between General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin is at the top of the list when it comes to Pentagon contracts, and General Dynamics is usually in the top 5. England was the president of General Dynamics' Land Systems Division, and later became president for General Dynamics' entire Fort Worth division. That division was sold to Lockheed, and he became a president there. Sadly, the list of such blatant conflicts of interests is nearly endless, and by no means limited to the military-industrial complex. The same is true of the revolving door in the biotech industry around companies like Monsanto. This list of officials includes Linda Fisher, a senior EPA official who later became Monsanto's VP of Government and Public Affairs, Michael Taylor, Obama's deputy FDA commissioner who also served as Monsanto's VP for Public Policy, and U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who served as a corporate lawyer for Monsanto in the 1970s. And in the healthcare sector, where high-ranking insurance company executives literally write the legislation that mandates everyone to purchase health insurance from the corporations.
Liz Fowler is my chief health counsel. Liz Fowler has put my team together, healthcare team. Liz Fowler worked for me many years ago, and left the private sector, and then came back when she realized that she could be there in the creation of healthcare reform, because she wanted to, in a certain sense, that to be her professional lifetime goal. She put together the white paper last November 2008, 87-page document, which became the basis, the foundation, the blueprint from which almost all healthcare measures and all bills, both sides of the aisle, came from.
The problem is so blatant, so obvious, so out in the open, that even its opponents readily admit to its existence. And yet it continues without significant opposition from the public. How can this happen? Because, in a twist that again would be difficult to explain to anyone not steeped in this system, people disagree not on the problem itself, but on what to call it. And you have people on the so-called left saying, well, it's all the corporatocracy, and they're right. And then you have people on the so-called right saying it's all big government, and they're right, without realizing they're talking about the same thing, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's sort of two methods that they do there. They'll say, well, it's all the corporations because they're bribing the government to act a certain way. And you can say, well, actually, it's the state, because they're the ones with all the power, that's enabling the corporations by awarding them your tax money and everything. And it's the same result. And what it really is, it's the state and corporations together walking on top of you. It's not that one has to bribe the other to act that way. It's in their own interest to do that. Once people realized they could vote themselves money, it was over. And that's what they do. And we've had a massive abuse of no-bid contracts, for example, which were supposed to be for emergencies, but it's just a way to wipe out the bidding process and literally allow the government to award money to itself. Because when you talk about a corporation, look at its board members, because corporations are not just they're not companies, they're publicly traded. They don't just have a boss that gets oversimplified. But if you look at their BOD, they have overlapping membership with people in the Pentagon and people in the president's cabinet and the Treasury, or name a department. And it's total insider trading. They're not only just investing in the people they're giving money in, they work for them simultaneously in the unelected portions of government, like the Pentagon is probably the largest one. And then you have commerce, labor, etc. And they all do it. They all do it. So what we really need is separation of corporation and state, and not just blame the government or blame the corporations. You have to see how they're working together and not get so fixated in belonging to a group or something on your left or right or whatever. That's really irrelevant.
This is the ultimate example of divide and conquer in action. A small, readily identifiable ruling oligarchy that no serious political observer denies the existence of is able to keep the public from attacking it by dividing them along ideological grounds, so that the public spends all their time arguing over definitions and splitting doctrinal hairs, instead of attacking the commonly acknowledged enemy. You couldn't ask for a more perfect system of control. Thankfully, the corollary of this divide and conquer strategy is that it is possible to unite the people against their common enemy simply by employing some rhetorical strategies of our own. All right, well, we could go on and talk about all of these problems. We could even talk about the solutions, which, again, are not particularly controversial. There are a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum, again, that would agree with the idea that there is something beyond just taxing the rich or just cutting social welfare. How about we cut the corporate welfare? Everyone can agree to that, except for the corporate fat cats themselves. But the real question, the $20 trillion question, is how do we move the conversation to that point, given the types of mental barriers that have been erected around these real solutions?
Yeah, I think you have to approach it, one, without a label. Like, don't come in saying I'm an anarchist or libertarian or whatever. Just come in saying we need to cut corporate welfare. And everyone will assume you're one of them, because everyone agrees with that. Everybody agrees with that. Cutting foreign aid, I think most people agree with, or reducing it. Not saying we shouldn't have no bid contracts. You sort of lose people because they don't know what that means. But keeping it simple, and I think that one, corporate welfare for sure, for banks, as well as for military industries, but you don't have to necessarily spell it out. Just say corporate welfare, and they'll understand, yeah, we don't need to be bailing out all these people with billions of dollars. That's kind of what got Occupy originally going, was the bailouts of the banks. And the Tea Party taxed enough already. Well, they don't want the same thing. And I think most people could agree on that. They just get caught up in these wedge issues and these sort of socially fun things to argue about that aren't really even legislative issues, and they get watered down by that. And so we have to really keep it simple, because not everybody's political. And we have a lot of low information voters too, but you have to just keep coming back to it and say we have to cut corporate welfare, and these are the people that vote for it, and you have to make that a one-issue pony to say maybe no more wars that's a nice way to save money. We don't need to have all these wars and occupations everywhere, and we need to cut corporate welfare. And then there's a whole CDE, but don't worry about that. Like, that's the two. If we could do that, I mean, getting rid of the Fed's a big thing, but I don't think we can get to that point and still we start reducing their grip first on the Congress that the lobbies have. And I think that starts by people getting really upset about corporate bailouts and welfare. They have to pay all that money back, and we have to stop bombing people. So peace and ending that kind of welfare, and we'd have plenty of money left over for whatever social programs that are struggling. We'd have plenty of money already for that. And there are other market solutions that are better than social welfare too. But I don't think you can really get that. You just can't bring up too many issues. And so I think we have to start with ending war, and then and I think also ending corporate welfare. I think 2 is enough, and that would be a good place. And there's easy solutions for that.
As we shall see next week, the idea of uniting the people against the oligarchs is not only possible, it is actually happening in case after case. But as always, it is a question of whether it is enough to push back against this oligarchical control, or if it is too little, too late.
Not continuing
Congresswoman
Section
Harman,
215
let me interrupt you. Congresswoman, let me interrupt you just for a moment. We've got some breaking news out of Miami. Stand by, if you will. Right now in Miami, Justin Bieber has been arrested on a number of charges. The judge is reading the charges.
This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.
Hawaii Political Reporter is not owned, influenced, or an agent of corporate, government, or special interest. We are a local, honest, independent source of political news and commentary. Our primary goals are to promote awareness of the non-aggression principle and to reduce violence, war, and death. To promote economic liberty, prosperity, and true civil rights as in the U.S. Constitution. To promote transparency and to bring awareness of corruption in government and the collusion at all levels with big-moneyed individuals and special interests to deprive the people of true choice of government that is truly by and for the people, for prosperity and freedom.
Let's get right to it from our good friend Michael Vale at stratrisks.com via The Verge. This algorithm can predict a revolution. For students of international conflict, 2013 provided plenty to examine. There was civil war in Syria, ethnic violence in China, and riots to the point of revolution in the Ukraine. For those working at Duke University's Ward Lab, all specialists in predicting conflict, the year 2013 looked like a betting sheet full of predictions that worked out and others that didn't pan out. According to Ward Lab's staff, the purpose of this conflict forecast project isn't to make predictions, but to test theories. If a certain theory of geopolitics can predict an uprising in the Ukraine, then maybe that theory is onto something. And even if these specialists could predict every conflict, it would only be half the battle. It's a success only if it doesn't come at the cost of predicting a lot of incidents that don't occur, says Michael D. Ward, the lab's founder and chief investigator, who also runs the blog Predictive Heuristics. And he also says it suggests that we might be on the right track. Now, fascinating backstory. I'm just giving you the bullet points of this article, and I implore you, as always, to follow the show notes and read these articles for yourself. There's a lot of interesting information in this article, but we'll note the story of automated conflict prediction starts in the 1990s when DARPA wanted to try out software-based approaches to anticipating which governments might collapse in the near future. Of course, the CIA was already on the case with section chiefs from every region filing regular forecasts, but DARPA wanted to see if computerized approach could do better, and then they all fought about it and didn't share information. And again, there's a much greater story in this article. This was dubbed ICEWS, I-C-E-W-S, the Integrated Conflict Early Warning System, and it succeeded almost immediately, clearing 80% with algorithms built on simple regression analysis. So Ward Lab is releasing a new sheet of predictions every 6 months and tweaking its algorithms with every development. It's a mirror, James, this is the fascinating part, of the same open versus closed debate in software. Only now, instead of fighting over source code and security audits, it's a fight over who can see the future the best. James.
Yes, it is a fascinating backstory, so I hope people will read through that article right down to the bottom where they do talk about that DARPA history, because that is important. And they also note that the ICEWS, the Integrated Conflict Early Warning System, was reclassified and went back down into the bowels of the Pentagon, where it is presumably still being tinkered with and tweaked and worked on, but we don't know anything about it anymore. Now we just know about these open iterations. And there's lots of them out there. In fact, I did a Boiling Frogs Post eye-opener report back in 2012 on Sentient World Simulation, Meet Your DoD Clone, about Purdue University's own iteration of this same idea. And I am somewhat skeptical about a lot of these ideas, the ideas of the virtual worlds and the predictions and recorded future and some of the different things that we've seen come along in this regard. I think some of it is hype that's being used to generate funds and grants and research money and stuff like that. But the idea, at any rate, is there, and I think that there is, I mean, it's really only a matter of time and of tweaking the right data subsets and all of this. And this is one of the underlying points of the entire Big Brother surveillance grid that never really gets looked at. A lot of people with nothing to hide, nothing to fear, ridiculous, bogus privacy argument that's been debunked a number of times. One of the things that they don't take into account is that, well, what if this data is being used in this DARPA system that's deep in the bowels of the Pentagon that we don't know anything about, to try to feed into the big prediction system, so that they are taking all your data in real time to predict what is going to happen in the near future? Wouldn't that give DARPA and the U.S. government and the DoD basically ultimate control over society if they can actually reasonably accurately predict what any one of their actions is going to actually eventuate in the real world? So again, this gets into this whole creepy scenario, but I hope people will go back and look at that eye-opener report where I talked about some of this in greater length.
So, James, I do find this story fascinating, and I think it speaks to our name of the New World Next Week, of looking forward to the future. So we'll include also a link to the Ward Lab conflict forecast, and you can look at their prediction sheets that they've put out. And I also will tie in, because this comes from Strat Risks, I just recently did what I hope to be the first installment of a new geopolitics series from Media Monarchy, where I talked to Michael Vale of stratrisks.com, and we talked about Sochi, TPP, and the aforementioned Ukraine. So, James, having said that, we'll move to our second set of stories this week, and this is where it's going to get pretty fast and furious. All of these stories are coming from my own foodworldorder.com. And this is a corporate trend, James. We'll start with the first one. Kraft cheese singles to lose artificial preservatives. Kraft is removing artificial preservatives from its most popular individually wrapped cheese slices, wrapped in plastic, of course, in the latest sign that companies are tweaking their recipe as food labels come under greater scrutiny. The change affects the company's Kraft singles in the full-fat American and white American varieties, which Kraft says accounts for the majority of the brand's sales. Sorbic acid is being replaced by natamicin, which Kraft says is a natural mold inhibitor. But that's not all. Chick-fil-A to serve chicken without antibiotics. The largest chicken chain in America shocked the fast food world late Tuesday, February 11th, when it announced that the company plans to only sell chicken raised without antibiotics at all of its stores within 5 years. The move is yet another signal that corporate America is increasingly aware of consumers' concerns about the ingredients in and the safety of the foods they eat. The corporate trend towards cleaner food seems to be catching fire. Those are the words of USA Today. And for the hat trick, James, Subway to remove chemical also found in yoga mats from their bread. Subway confirmed that they were removing a chemical used to make yoga mats and rubber soles on shoes from their sandwich bread, saying, quote, "We're already in the process of removing azodicarbonamide as part of our bread improvement efforts, despite the fact that it is a USDA and FDA-approved ingredient." Subway said to CBS News via email, the complete conversion to have this product out of the bread will be done soon. The fact that azodicarbonamide was used as an ingredient in U.S. and Canadian Subway products was brought to light by foodbabe.com blogger Vani Hari, one of my partner Cassie Cohn's favorite sources for important food news. So, James, I think the takeaway, as they say, the corporate trend towards cleaner food seems to be catching fire.
And while we're on that trend, perhaps we should take something from the other end of the spectrum. People might have seen McDonald's Canada just had a viral video on YouTube recently where they showed and debunked the pink goop myth about their chicken McNuggets. This is how they're really made, and they show step by step how they're made and everything. And although I suppose the goop that they actually make these McNuggets from aren't quite as pink as the images that we've all seen online of the pink goop, it still looks like goop to me. So I really don't see how that debunked anything. It still looks like just crap that they've put together from gizzards and the like, which is actually what it is. So I don't know what they're exactly proving with that video, but still, it is at the very least, I think, part of the same trend that all of these stories are part of, which is opening the doors and trying to get rid of the crap and trying to show people, hey, look, we're clean, we're healthy, we don't have strange chemicals in our food, honest. Oh, that yoga mat stuff, we'll take that out, no big deal. So again, it does seem like a very small victory indeed to win the taking out of yoga mat chemicals from Subway bread, but it is part of this bigger picture that we're pointing to and that we've been pointing to for a while. And we noted, for example, just a few weeks back about the non-GMO Cheerios, which again, well, oats don't have GMOs anyways. There's no GMO oats, but they did take out some of the GMO ingredients from the Cheerios that were in there anyway. So it is, again, baby steps, but it is at the very least a sign that there is an effect going on right now, and it can intensify if we intensify our efforts. Again, it's things like food babe blogs and things like this that are truly changing the discourse around the food that we're eating. And hopefully, if we continue to press on these, we can actually get people to realize the crap that they are ingesting without even thinking twice about it, because they've never stopped to think about what products are going into these fast food chains and all of these disgusting products that are basically chemical concoctions. So at any rate, the discourse is changing. Companies are going to have to react to it, and it may be just baby steps, but at any rate, it is happening. And this, I think, is a much more productive way of looking at this than crying out for the FDA to come in and regulate it all or whatever, because we all know how the backdoor shenanigans happens with that. So on the whole, this is a positive story. I'm very glad that you've pointed out this trend.
James, you mentioned the story we covered a few weeks ago about removing GMOs from Cheerios. We'll also include a link, and there's another one that's not coming to me, but the amazing Lee Camp of Moment of Clarity has a petition to General Mills saying, hey, that's a really good start, removing GMOs from your Cheerios. Now why don't you do it from everything? And I believe they've kind of taken notice that, again, folks like Food Babe, folks like Lee Camp, hopefully folks like you and I and everybody out there watching this can start to make those kind of moves, because really that's all it takes. And I've seen it. It doesn't take a whole lot of people to scare corporate entities into covering their butts and running and hiding and hopefully the best part, actually changing practices. So James, having said that, we'll move to our third and final set of stories this week. That, again, is a little bit of updates on stories we've covered recently and just over the last month and a half here on New World Next Week. The pain never seems to stop for my home state of West Virginia. And again, posted to foodworldorder.com. Patriot Coal prep plant spills slurry into West Virginia Creek. State officials in West Virginia were trying Tuesday, February 11th, to contain a coal slurry spill into a creek in the same general area where a toxic chemical spill last month tainted drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people in and around the state capital of Charleston. That earlier spill, James, was caused by Freedom Industries, and this time it's caused by Patriot Coal. Just another great way of these sort of phony, euphemistic names. Freedom Industries, I guess, is actually somewhat a West Virginia company. Patriot Coal, on the other hand, is based in St. Louis, Missouri. So our other update, James, do you want to take that, or do you want me to blast through all the updates? And
Let's just blast through.
Okay. Email shows effort to shield Osama bin Laden death photos. This from the Associated Press. A newly released email shows that 11 days after the alleged killing of terror leader Osama bin Laden in 2011, the U.S. military's top special operations officer ordered subordinates to destroy any photographs of the al-Qaeda founder's corpse or turn them over to the CIA, which you could argue is essentially the same thing. The email was obtained under a Freedom of Information request by the conservative legal group Judicial Watch. Update to a story we covered just recently, now in the hands of the NYPD. NYPD ogles Google Glass specs. This from CNN. The New York Police Department has procured 2 pair of Google Glass specs, the experimental head-mounted computers, to determine possible applications to police work. The department said in a statement, quote, as part of an ongoing interest in the advancements in the field of technology, the NYPD regularly conducts blah, 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 blah. So, yes, the NYPD it's only second to the LAPD as far as corrupt police organizations in America, will now have super space age minority report glasses. Our fourth and final update, James, I actually maybe fudged this a little bit. We actually covered the story about India going to Mars. However, different kind of update. China's Jade Rabbit lunar rover declared dead. It landed on the moon and has essentially died and will probably stay there forever, James.
Well, there's been a few of those, and there have been speculation about some of the ones that have died and lost contact, whether they really did die and lose contact. But that's speculation for a completely different day. On the OBL note, well, there is the completion of the life and death cycle of that particular character on the geopolitical stage, and all done and dusted, and we will never see any proof whatsoever that he was killed back when they said he was. So there it is. And on the note of the other story, which is escaping me at the moment, which was the third one in that update series?
You got the NYPD or
yes, Google Glass. That's right. On that very note, I'm actually just writing the subscriber newsletter for this weekend, and that includes a story about a really bizarre and ridiculous patent that Google filed last year regarding some technology that they are probably going to try to incorporate into Google Glass at some point. So I hope people will subscribe. I'm writing about the 5 signs that Google is Big Brother. So and I could probably write about 500 signs, but you got to limit it to some point. So again, thank you so much for putting those updates together. So much going on. We can only handle a tiny bit of it, but we do appreciate all the suggestions that come in through Twitter. Once again, hashtag New World Next Week. Please keep those coming in, and follow the hashtag so that you can see what other people are submitting. And again, I hope we can create a community of users around that.
I think we're already doing it, James.
Federal than Federal Express. You try a hide and destroy a freedom. You seek agenda. We know you anti-American. You come pervert American Constitution. 1913, corrupt in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer. He can see you lying.